So I'm going to talk about Mylyn, which isn't my project. I'm Bjorn with the Eclipse Foundation, and Mylyn was done by Mick Kirsten and a bunch of other people who happen to live in Vancouver, BC, none of whom could make it today, mostly because many of them are having small children sometime in the next day or a couple weeks, or at least their wives are. And so for some reason, they didn't want to come down to California and miss that event just so they could talk here at Google. So instead, I'm giving this talk because I really like this Mylyn stuff, and I use it all the time. And as I put in the abstract, once you start using it, you'll get hooked on it, and you'll never go back to not using it. It turns out, from my point of view, Mylyn is incredibly simple. And so this talk should be fairly short, and you can ask lots of questions, because I just have to cover a couple points, and then all of a sudden, it's totally obvious. Much like when I looked up and noticed that we're actually all on the ceiling because the balloons are floating in the air from the floor. No, okay, it's not obvious. So a little history of Mylyn. They started a couple years ago. They did a user study. It's actually all funded. It's all started around Mick's PhD work at the University of British Columbia. He was looking into a number of things about the way people do work. And they started building on top of Eclipse because a number of different research universities and so on have found Eclipse to be a good platform for building new tools around software development on top of. So they were working away on it and discovered it to be incredibly useful and turned it into a project. And the main observation here is when you're looking at Eclipse, and here's Eclipse captured as a picture on a slide. I'll do some demos in a bit. It's got lots of stuff up here. Now, you guys are all familiar with Eclipse, so you will know what all the little A's and little yellow things and the blue things, and it all makes perfect sense to you. But on the other hand, there's a lot of stuff going on there on the screen at once. And in fact, most of it isn't relevant to the current task that you have at this very moment. So, you know, more stuff there. And the real problem is information overload. And we're all multitasking all the time. In fact, as I was sitting at the back, while Michael was talking, I noticed that everybody in the audience, or at least 90% of you, were multitasking at the same time. You were reading email on your BlackBerry, or there's one guy I was watching who had like 7 tabs open on the browser and was zipping back and forth and doing all this stuff. So he's multitasking and listening to the talk at the same time. And we have that same problem when we're programming, at least I do, is that I'm doing all these different things, and people call me on the phone, or they instant message me, or Twitter goes off, and I'm constantly switching back and forth between all the different tasks I'm trying to do. And every one of the tasks I'm trying to do has a particular context surrounding it, a set of files I'm working on, a particular bug report I'm working on. And I don't know if you guys read that New York Times article from, a couple months ago that basically said multitasking makes us stupid. And the reason it makes us stupid is because we lose that context every time we switch to a new task. So the basic thing that Mylyn does for you is it makes tasks first-class citizens. So tasks are now integrated into the IDE, and it filters the IDE down to the exact task, the context of the task that you're working on. So over here, we have a list of tasks. And notice that like this Navigator Project Explorer over here is now filtered down to just the things that are relevant for that particular task. And all the views inside Eclipse are filtered down to the things that are relevant for that particular task. And then when I switch to a different task, my phone rings, somebody calls and says, oh, some website is down. You know, we can't submit talks to EclipseCon anymore. I go up there, I click on a different task up in the task list, and the whole IDE switches over to the context for that particular task and enables the windows and filterings for that task and closes down this one. And then when I come back to this one, I re-enable this. It all goes back to this particular context. So in order to do that, Mylyn had to make tasks be first-class entities inside the IDE. That's the essential bits of Mylyn. My talk's over for the day. No, really, seriously, that's the essential bits of Mylyn. The rest of this talk is all expanding on that particular topic, showing you a couple demos and some of the neat technology about how it works. But the essential task things are that tasks are first-class and they're integrated, and you only see the bits that you're working on because of that. Yeah?
One fear I would have is that the decision Mylyn makes about what I need to see misses something that I really needed to see.
Well, so we solved that problem with brain surgery. We go in, we alter your brain, and then you don't even remember. No, there's this nifty little button. I don't think I can jump high enough. Maybe I can do this here. There's a button up here, the little purple button up there, which you can turn on and off whether it filters it or not. So if you've discovered when you're looking around that you can't find the right thing, you turn off the filtering, and then you get the whole UI back again, and you can be confused. And then once you found it, you can turn the filtering back on again. But the thing is, it's sort of like, Google, I assume, not working here, gathers a lot of data about people as they browse around through the click stream that you do. Like when you search for something, it says, did you really mean to search for something else, right? And so one of the things that Mylyn does is it watches your click stream as you walk around and work in the IDE, and has a degree of interest model that makes some assumptions about what you're interested in based on what you've seen before as you're walking around in the IDE. And they've worked on it quite a bit, and I assumed that you could always make it better. But so far, I haven't found a lot of cases where it doesn't work. And then the cases where I found where it hides stuff that I actually wanted to see, I just use the global search function, and it finds it. And then once I found it, I'm starting to work on it. So therefore, I'm interested in it, and then it appears in all the filtered views of the menus and things. Other questions?
How do you see shared task loads?
How do I see shared what?
Task loads. If you're working on a task with someone else. Or...
Right. So that's in this task view over here. And I'll actually show you a demo of that. But the task view in this particular case is connected up to Bugzilla, which is where they're storing all of their tasks. These guys, the Mylyn guys. So those are all Bugzilla numbers, actually, Eclipse.org Bugzilla numbers. And so since they're in Bugzilla, everybody who's got connection to Bugzilla can see them and shares them that way. You can have your own private task repository that you share among just a few set of people and so on. And in fact, the way I use it, I'm hooked up to 4 different task repositories at once. And I have a private one. I have a private one for Eclipse work. I have one for public Eclipse work, and then so on. OK, so. So now we're going to have an overview of what I was going to tell you. I'm actually using mixed slides here, so I'm a little not quite up to speed on exactly what's coming next, because Mick wrote them and said, here, give this talk. But I could give the talk without the slides, because I just think it's so exciting. So I gave you the introduction, which was the entire talk. And then I'm going to go over it again a couple times. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the framework and some technical details behind it. Like I said, before you used Mylyn, you had all your things, little post-it notes and so on. And now you have this one task list. And you're connected up to repositories so that you can see each one of them. And then Mylyn does a number of things for you. It allows you to do offline editing and access. So it caches all your tasks on the disk so you can edit them and so on while you're on the airplane, which is handy, or when you're commuting back and forth in the bus. It does change notifications integrated with Eclipse, so they appear in the same resource change stream that other change notifications in Eclipse appear. What else can we say here? Oh, you can search them when you do Control-H to get the search box. When you do a search there, it searches across all the tasks. It's fully integrated with all the rest of Eclipse. So it's just, it's not just sort of an add-on on top of it. It's not just like a piece of paper, a Post-it note. It's integrated into the whole environment. And in fact, the way they built these things is when they built the filtered project view, or the package view, it's actually the original package view with they put some extension points into the package view, and then they filter them that way, or they use the existing ones, filtering things that are there. And so it's actually not even a separate piece of code. It's actually the same code that you've got out there. They've just plugged in some additional filters into the extension points to make it all work. So the way this task-focused UI works, and I think the next slide has this little animation, which is kind of cool, is that it has this degree of interest model that keeps track of what you've seen recently and therefore what you might be interested in. And it's not just what you've seen, it's also the things that are connected to what you've seen. So if you're working on a particular method, you're probably interested in other methods by the same name in the class structure that might be callable. If you're working on a particular package, you might be interested in other packages that are nearby that package in the naming structure, or ones that have references to it. So it's not just what you've seen, but also using some knowledge of the semantics of the programming language you're currently working on, things that you might be interested in. So if you're working on Java, it knows about the semantics of Java to figure out things that are interesting to where you currently are. If you're working on C using CDT, again, it has an integration with CDT, so it knows something about things that you might be interested in nearby where you are. And then the parts that are interesting to, that they're the best for my opinion are the context is obvious and managed. It's obvious because it's filtered, and it's managed because it keeps track of it all, so that when you switch back and forth between tasks, it remembers where you were and comes back to it. And in fact, you can even share your context with other people on your team. Currently, the IDE just stores the context locally on your machine, but you can save that context to the task you're working on, which, if you're using Bugzilla as your task repository, just saves a zip file of some context information as attachment on Bugzilla. And then somebody else, another person on your team, can open up that context using Mylyn, and it automatically applies that context to that person's Eclipse IDE, and then they have the exact same context that you were looking at, filtered down in the exact same way. So you can share them back and forth. And then what's very handy is this one-click task switching. Let's see if the next slide is the animation that I think it is. Oh, no, it says demo. So I'm supposed to give you a demo of this. So we'll see if I can make this work. Here we go. Here's my latest Ganymede installation. And you'll notice that over here I have my task list the way I've got it set up. For example, there's all sorts of little UI hints in Mylyn that you get used to, just like you did with Eclipse. So one of them is up here that there's a little blue arrow that says there's incoming things that I haven't looked at yet. And one of them is here, we need to set the registration fees for Eclipse Summit Europe. So it says, here, Bjorn, you'd better do that, and I should do something about this. So if I wanted to do that, well, actually, that's not the one I wanted to do. Let's go look here under My Bugs. Oh, no, I can't remember what I was going to have on the demo. OK, well, we'll just do the registration fees. And so I can activate the task here. And it shows me that I haven't chosen any files for that one, so that wasn't the task I was going to demo. So I was looking into this problem, and I have this particular file was part of the problem to make that. And my screen's turned so small here on this display. But here's a PHP file with all sorts of code that generates the conference website. And so I happen to know and I had to stop working on that problem because I have to give this talk. So I just turned off that task, and it retained all that context. And then I go and give the talk. And then when I come back to it, I turn the task on, and it's filtered my display back down again using the context that I was in. Now, I have a number of different queries here for the different types of bugs. Here's a list of all the bugs that are currently open in the Eclipse portal. And some of them are assigned to me, which I've filtered down as my bugs. And so here are the ones that are assigned to me. For example, this one, if I activate this one, there's some files that I'm working on for that particular one. So I've switched to that particular task. If I switch to the, away from it, then I'm back to the unfiltered view. So it saves the context of where I am. I've got all the tasks explicitly mentioned. Now, these are all just Bugzilla tasks because we happen to store everything in Bugzilla. So we just have a form here that edits the Bugzilla, and it has everything that, including all the comments that have been made and all the things that you'd normally see inside the Bugzilla task repository or bug repository. Now, Mylyn will attach to a number of different repositories, not just Bugzilla, but Jira, and there's a whole list of them. And through different adapters, so that it not forcing you to use one particular repository, but it'll attach to whatever repository you're currently using and use that as the task repository and the code repository. And we can do that by show view task repositories. So here are the 3 repositories that I've currently got set up for my particular system. So we have, for instance, the EclipseCon one. I mean, the Eclipse one is attached up to the Eclipse Bugzilla, and it's logged in with me, and it keeps track of all that information. It caches it away so that it can resynchronize, and it resynchronizes on a regular basis so that these things stay up to date. And then I can get the little blue arrows that come in and the arrows that go out, and so on, back and forth again. Now let's go look at a particular project. See if I can remember what I saved one away here. So this particular one I said was a Java one, which it's not. So here now I've got, I set up a context just so you could see how it looks when we're working on a Java task. And so it's filtered away a number of Java things. But again, I'm just in the Java perspective. Well, I'm not in the Java perspective. I could be in the Java perspective. And you know, seeing all the bits and pieces over there, you know, that, oh, it's this file and it's that file, and the particular degree of interest model that keeps track of the dependencies between them. So you guys all following this as I wave my hands around and zip the mouse around? But again, I'm just repeating what I said before, which is there's a list of tasks over here. In this particular case, I've restricted the list of tasks by searching for a particular number because I happen to know that somebody had called me up and said it was 203844. But you know, I could also just go have the complete list of tasks and find them. Now, another thing that I can do, but I was going to demo that later, but I'll demo it now because I'm talking to you, is you can also, it also has a whole thing for scheduling. So I've scheduled a number of tasks to happen today. These are them. And I've scheduled some others for later this week. And then there's a whole bunch of ones that are unscheduled. So you can go and set, you know, it's not just a list of tasks, but also task management. So I can say which ones I'm working on when, and it'll notify you as they're coming along. One of the interesting things is, let's see, we can say schedule for, and then I wonder if I can say choose date. No, can't. So I have an older version of Mylyn. They have this feature where you can say schedule it for someday. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. And this turns out to be actually really useful because it's for things that you know you should be working on, but it's not today that I'm working on them. It's really soon now. And so you schedule them for the someday, and it constantly floats into the future and reminds you that, yeah, you're supposed to be working on this, but it's not scheduled for a particular day. So it never goes out of, you know, never becomes past due, but it's always just about to be due. So, and the reason I mention that, besides as kind of a clever little feature, is that it's one of those things that as you're using the Mylyn system to manage your workload and your tasks, that's one of the things that you do. You know, you have all these little Post-it notes, and you got the things I'm working on today, and then this list of things over here that I need to be getting to. And if you're going to use some automated system like this to manage your task list, you have to manage that. You have to have that exact same behavior that you're used to with your Post-it notes or whatever other mechanism you use. And one of those behaviors is, yeah, I got this list of really soon now, but not critically due today. And so they have even that feature in where you can say someday, and then it just floats along into the future. OK, so. You know, I haven't turned sound on, so I don't know whether it's going to yell or not. So I don't know. I don't like these revealing slides, so we'll just scroll down to the bottom. Oops, too far. Nope. There we go. So a number of tips about how to get started using Mylyn. And so in addition to getting started with Mylyn, Mick and his colleagues have started a startup based using the Mylyn technology as a basis called TaskTop, which extends Mylyn to your entire desktop, not just your IDE. So it incorporates things like integration with Gmail and what's that Microsoft Mail product, Outlook. And no, seriously, I don't remember what it's called. There wasn't a slight. And Microsoft Word and other documents like that. But this is about the IDE version. So you know, you want to manage your tasks with one task list. I manage them slightly differently. Personally, you saw in my demo that I had a number of different queries up there. I have one list of all the queries, or all the things that are open under each of the projects that I'm busy working on. And then I have one of the things that are assigned to me so that I can monitor the work that everybody else is doing. And then when things are assigned to me, they show up in my little work queue. So I do have one task list for me, but I have lots of task lists for everybody else. You want to work with different task repositories. Like I said, I have one for my private stuff. I have one for things I work with our meeting planners for our conferences, one for private foundation, internal things like contracts, and then one public one that I work with across all of Eclipse open source. You know, you can navigate around the tasks using hyperlinks. Again, that's the tight integration with Eclipse. Every one of the tasks turns into a hyperlink, so you can just go and click on them. If I'll try and remember to show this when I get back to the demo. If a task depends on other tasks, you can just click on the other tasks and it goes right to them, so you don't have to remember to type in the number or anything like that. You can search the repositories, and then, of course, my favorite one, multitask with ease. So I'm less stupid when I'm using Mylyn, because when the phone calls or the IM comes in, says, there's a problem with this particular piece of code, I can just click over to that particular problem report. It saves everything I was doing, so that when I come back, I'm back to exactly where I was. And getting back is easier. You can navigate Java programs and C programs with Focus. And there was one of the other languages that Eclipse supports is also adding Mylyn integration. And you can share these task contexts between members of your team so that you can hand work off. You can look into a problem. You can look into a feature, figure out what it's all about. Oh, I still need to talk to that person. I can save that context. They can restore that context. They can look into it. You can have a conversation about that. So I don't have to tell you, go to this file. I can just say, here's the context, and you can load it up. And you can share that same context that you've recovered in your head back and forth, because we've made it first class. So then there's the expert tips. And the get set up for team awareness has to do with setting up your task list queries the way I have, so you can see different sets of people. So I work with a number of people at the Eclipse Foundation on one project, and I work with a different set of people on a different project. So I have different of those folders set up for each of those projects, so that I can see those little icons. New things have come in on this particular task list or on this particular task list, and I can monitor what's going on. The focus your week one day at a time is the scheduling issue. One thing you find as soon as you start using something like Mylyn, or tools like task list management have been around for a long time. I think one of the things that Mylyn does that other such tools haven't done in the past is this tight integration with the IDE, where it shows you the context you're working on, and it's not just a to-do list. But one of the problems you find when you start putting your to-do list into an automated system like this is that your to-do list is a lot longer than you remember it. And even mine isn't nearly as long as when Mick gives this demo. It goes on for pages and pages. And it's like, well, how can I ever possibly deal with that to-do list? Well, if you focus on a small piece of it, what I'm going to get done today, or what I'm going to get done today plus someday, which is like one of my favorite features there, then it's a plausibly doable list of things to do, and you prioritize them. These are really important. These are not so important. And you can use all that mechanism, and it flows along, and it's not so scary. Let's see. You can actually manipulate the task context if you become an expert. So if the system accidentally puts things into your context that you didn't intend it to, you can actually go and tell it these aren't really in the context. This is one of those features I wish Amazon had, because I'm buying books, and I buy a bunch of books, and then my sister wants a book, so I buy a book for her, and all of a sudden I start getting recommended books about horses. Well, I could care less about horses, so I want to go into my Amazon context and say, no, horses are not interesting to me, but I can't. But you can with Mylyn if you're an expert.
You can these days. You can say this was a gift.
Oh, OK. So there you go. If I were an expert. You can work offline. I don't see how anybody can work with small monitors, but Mick claims it's possible. So he has a line about that. To me, if it's not this big, it's just not usable. It has this nice mechanism for dealing with patches for Java code. So obviously, when I'm working on a particular problem, and I have a context I've built around that problem, and I finally have solved that problem, it's obviously that piece of solution that I've built that turns into a patch just for that particular problem. So there are some one-click buttons in there to take the context, the changes only in the context that I've worked on, and turn it into a patch and attach it to that particular bug. And vice versa, if I do a team commit to commit the code, it takes the bug description of the task that I'm working on and assigns it as the default comment for all of the code that's being checked in. And it keeps track of if you're doing changes to multiple different bugs at the same time. So I'm working on this bug and I'm working on this bug. Then it keeps those change sets separate. So when I'm working on one and I'm done with that one and I hit to commit that code, it takes just the changes for that context and commits them, and doesn't submit the changes for the other context. Of course, that does fall down if you have both contexts pointing to the same file, so you have two sets of changes in the same file. It's not actually that clever, but it's close, right? Yeah, did someone have a question? No. And then, of course, Mick has to put in this line at the bottom here, which is, once you become an expert, you should contribute back to the Mylyn project and make it even better. That's what that particular line is. You know, rah, rah, go open source, contribute to it. And I really suggest that once you start this, you'll be hooked and you'll love to do that. Yeah.
To what extent does this integrate with project planning tools, Microsoft Project, Liquid Planner, versus replace those project planning tools?
Mylyn itself doesn't integrate with any of the project planning tools. The Tasktop tools that they've built in their startup and sell, I believe, do integrate with the project planning tools. But I'm talking about the Mylyn project, not the Tasktop commercial thing. Yeah.
So given you have a team awareness and you have all this task management, can you just dispense with project planning tools? Can I generate a Pert chart from my task list?
Well, you know, now we're going into the realm of opinion, but I haven't found Pert charts to be useful in a long time, so I would have said get rid of them even before. But it depends on how you run your project, right? So if I were building, for instance, the Mars lander, the Phoenix lander that landed recently, probably I wouldn't use an agile software development process because, you know, I think the total landing took, what, 12 minutes, right? And so if a bug occurred in the first 3 minutes, there really wasn't time left to upload a change, you know, to fix that. So you might want a bit more rigorous process to do that one. I tend to work on projects which are much more agile and have a shorter iteration cycle and much less death or destruction should they fail. And so I tend to use a less heavyweight planning process. And so we tend to use lists of tasks as our project planning mechanism. The sort of only concession we've made to normal project planning is that we number the tasks in some partial order because they tend to be dependent on one another. But that's about the extent of what we've done.
So can I get a burn down chart?
Can you get a burn down chart from this? Contribute bugs and patches. Actually, I think that would be a fabulous thing to add to it. And I don't think it's in Mylyn, although it might, you know, you might add that as a feature request, and those guys would probably just whip it out. Because, you know, Eclipse has got the whole business intelligence reporting toolkit, or business intelligence reporting, I guess it's toolkit. And so it's easy to make that sort of report, and all the data is there in the database of all the things that people have worked on. And it actually, Mylyn even keeps track of how much time you spent working on each of the bugs, if you turn that option on. I mean, you don't want people to spy on you if you don't want it, but you can turn that option on. Because, of course, it knows how long that task was active, when it was activated, when it was deactivated. And so you know basically how long each person spent on each one of the bugs. And so you've got all that data there. So you could easily build a burn down chart, but it's not in this version of Mylyn. Yeah?
For sharing task context, is that only via the repository, or is there some way you can email task context and package up and something?
Gosh, I didn't bother to email task context because I just use the repository to share them all. They're just zipped up files, binary files, so I suppose you could mail them around, but you'd have to go and extract them from the repository. They're not made into first-class citizens that you can drop into a mail message. You know, when you say share it, it just attaches it to the task you're working on and posts it out to the database.
If I'm working on a given bug and I have to go do something else or go on vacation, and I
Vacations?
take the code back in and someone else takes it out and makes changes to it, I come back from vacation, I take the code back out, does my task context remember sort of, or does it have to reparse everything? Or I'm trying to get the underlying representation of the knowledge.
Right. So the thing that's not going to happen is if someone made a big refactoring while you were away, it doesn't refactor your task context as well, right? Which I think is what you're asking. And I suppose that the Mylyn guys could add that because the latest Java refactoring stuff that was put in, actually I believe last year's Europa release of Eclipse, includes some deltas in the refactoring. It keeps a track of basically an audit log of all the refactorings that applied. So, oops. Can't be good. So you could actually take that delta stream and apply it to the context, which obviously keeps track of, you know, where it is in the tree. So you could apply it all and do that. They haven't. That's about all I can say. Yeah.
Does Mylyn use any kind of local data store to store information, to tasks?
Yeah. So it does store it in the .meta directory of your workspace. It has a bunch of information about tasks you've chosen and private things that you don't want to make public. So for instance, your particular schedule of when you've decided to work on things like someday is stored locally and not in the public repository because they've made the decision that that's not something that I want to broadcast to the world, that I keep delaying this particular task because I find it unpleasant, right? So yeah, it does have a local repository of a bunch of files, but it's just a bunch of files. It's not even a SQL database or anything.
Is there some way to back up the local repository? Because one thing that happens to me is that, you know, once every 6 months or so, I have to say that the workspace gets corrupted.
Yeah, you can just copy it. That's one thing. And there's also a command in Mylyn to back it up. I just have a cron job that just copies it every night. And then I'm safe.
Some people prefer, I'm not one of them, but I'm required to like search filters. Prefer to in multiple different like one workspace for one project per workspace. So multiple instances of Eclipse. Can you share Mylyn between different?
You can in the new release that came out just tomorrow. See, that's one of those scheduling things. You can actually share your metadata between workspaces. I would say that it's probably more of a late beta, early gamma feature because it's brand new. But yes, that is now available because there are people like you who had to do that, as opposed to the Mylyn development team who only works in one workspace ever. You know, so yeah.
So when you want to share context, does it mean that you have to have your projects live within your workspace? Because in our environment, we don't have our projects, their source tree doesn't live within your workspace itself. It lives outside of your workspace. So it's going to be a different location on disk for everybody. So if I want to share it with you.
Yeah, it does it by the resource thing on the side. So I'm pretty sure that with the names, I mean, I don't know because I haven't tried that, but I'm pretty sure that because the names are the same, it'll work. But it would be an interesting experiment.
We'd start by project name and then resource underneath there rather than full path to the element.
Well, I think that's the way it keeps it internally is what I'm saying. I don't think they keep the file locations because then it wouldn't work between different machines, right? Because, you know, my home directory at work.
Workspace, then it would work. So I'm wondering if it's requiring you to have your projects live within your workspace.
Well, so the projects have to live within the workspace no matter where you store them on the disk, right? Because otherwise the Resource Explorer won't work. So in that sense, they do live within the workspace. But the question is, where do you keep them on the disk? And I don't think that matters for Mylyn, although I can't guarantee that because I've never actually tried that. No, that's not true. I actually do have a couple cases where I keep the files in a different location on my disk, and it does work. So I'm pretty sure that would work. Yeah?
Can you talk about Mylyn as a plugin or in the community that is what other plugins it depends on and what other plugins depend on it?
So, right. I think your question is, how many other plugins do I have to load in order to load Mylyn? Is that what you're saying?
I guess no, it's interesting to me the way that it interacts with you know, like the package queue and other things like that. So that seems to me a good story about how plugins can work in Eclipse.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I have some slides at the end of the talk, but I'm a lot less capable of giving that part of the talk than Mick is because I didn't write any of the code. So we can mumble about it, but probably your best bet is to actually talk to those guys directly and ask them how their new babies are and then, you know, get the architecture details. I do know that one of the things they've done tried very hard to do is the core Mylyn and is separate from each of the adapters. So the adapter for Bugzilla is a separate plugin from the adapter for Jira, which is a separate plugin from the adapter for each of the other systems that it attaches to. So when you load up Mylyn for your particular version of Eclipse, you select the set of plugins that's going to work for the tools that you have. So it's sort of this model where instead of having to force one central authority for everything, you just sort of attach to all the different types of repositories, code, tasks, and so on that you can interface with. But that's not the question you asked. So, yeah.
I was wondering, so I see Mylyn's integrating, I guess, with the SCM and the issue tracking. and you can actually, it seems like to me you're not that far from maybe being able to do full like kind of workspace provisioning, you know, making it easier when new people come on team stuff. How much further do you think we would need to add on to Mylyn to make that sort of thing possible?
So in order to make full workspace provisioning possible from Mylyn would be like almost no effort at all, because Eclipse already has one or two, depending on how you count it, other projects that do workspace provisioning. The one I happen to use is Buckminster, and you can give it a specification, and it goes and finds all the different projects and all the dependencies that you need to load up into your workspace to make it possible. So if you wanted to extend Mylyn to do that, you would just make it so that in addition to all the other things on the task, there might be a little additional thing, which is provision me a new workspace for this particular task. And so then when someone's working away on a task, in addition to saving the context, it would save away a Buckminster spec, which would allow somebody else to provision exactly the right set of projects to do that. And integrating those two together should be very easy. They both have a good set of APIs. So very little work, I would say, on that one. Yeah?
Do you have any familiarity with the level of effort to make other languages supported in Mylyn? Programming languages and visual languages, perhaps something like, you know, a scripting language like Python or Ruby, or visual languages like UML?
Yeah, I don't know about the UML side. It's going to depend a lot on what the model behind the editor is. So one of the reasons that Mylyn works so well with Java is that the JDT has an excellent model of the Java program in the background that it can use to walk over its degree of interest model and build up that context. So if you had a language,
Say CDT just provide Mylyn support tomorrow.
Right. For another one of these tomorrow releases is that the CDT has a model as well, so that Mylyn can now integrate with that and walk over it. Some of the language-specific editors, I was using one of the Perl ones, not an Eclipse one, but it's Eclipse plugin, and I noticed that it really is just storing as a text string behind the scenes as an editor, so it doesn't have a good model back there. So Mylyn couldn't integrate well with it, except at the text file level, because there's no way to specify exactly what I'm interested in when I'm editing that Perl file, right? So I believe that it's not that much work if there's a model behind it. My computer keeps going to sleep. But that if there's no model behind it, it's basically impossible, right? The idea of integrating it with a visual editor, I think that's an interesting question. And it's an interesting question not so much in the amount of work it would be, because if there's a model behind it, which there probably is for a visual editor, it wouldn't be too much work. But the problem is, how do you display a visual display in a partial form? One of the nice things about, let me see if we can go to another screen here. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'll go to this screen. So one of the nice things about this display is that it's a tree. And so it's really easy to filter a tree over here and display something. But if you were displaying like a UML diagram or something, and you wanted to filter out to some particular context, I think there's an interesting question of how do you reduce that so that it still makes sense and it can expand back into the larger thing. I just think there's an interesting, sort of visual problem there. I don't think the level of effort is that great, but there's a sort of a research problem there. And I noticed down here my little taskbar is busy synchronizing. So on a regular basis, it goes out to the database and checks to see what the current set of tasks are. And so if anything had come up, we'd have some new little blue arrows that pointed in and just goes out there and checks and makes sure everything is, I'm up to date on the tasks.
So if I'm working on a task and I have my context and there's 5 files involved, and I finish my task and I want to submit that to SVN or some other repository, is there some way to just say submit these 5 files?
Yeah, in fact, you use the exact same submit command that you currently use, whatever it is. Right. So I happen to use CVS because the Eclipse files are all stored in CVS. So I just go over here and I say team synchronize or team commit, and it just the Mylyn integration is integrated with both the SVN and the CVS adapters, and it takes the task description and puts it in as the default comment, attaches that set of changes from the change set into that, then does the commit, right? So you don't have to change your behavior at all because they've integrated that already into the IDE. And that's the neat thing about Mylyn is it's got its fingers in everywhere in the IDE. So your behavior is exactly the same, except that you go over there and press a little purple button to say I'm working on that task, or press the purple. That's pretty much it, right? Which is why this was a short talk.
Does the connector API let you sync up the scheduling information? Like, say you had
like your Bugzilla system
actually had scheduling fields? I don't actually know, but we could look at the code afterwards and see. So I noticed the next thing on my on the slides here is this under the hood little animation. So let me show you the animation so that you can at least be entertained by it. So the idea is that as you do some interaction, it's got this context which keeps track of sort of how interested you are in something. So I'm looking at this method, so I'm this interested in this particular thing, right? And then I navigate from there to the class, and so now I'm more interested in the class and a little less interested in the method. And so internally, Mylyn is keeping track of this data structure, which keeps track of how interested I am in certain things. Then I go to the interface, and again, I'm more interested in the interface now, less in the class and less. So as I navigate around and work on things or don't work on things, if I haven't been working on something for quite a while, it drifts away out of my level of interest because I haven't looked at it in a while, and drops out of the context. So it keeps track of what you're looking at. But one of the things that's interesting here is, as I'm going to go back to the method, so now the method becomes more interesting. And I make an edit to the method, so the method is even more interesting. And let's see, I forget what the little, what's the little, what's that? What's the little diamond? I can't remember what the diamond is. But the thing I wanted to show here is that that this particular thing, which I can't remember off the top, just driving me nuts here.
You know what? It probably means intuitive.
Yeah. The intuitive is related to the method. Is that what it is? And so, because it's related, it's part of the task context, right? And so things that are related to it are also part of your context because they're part of the things you might be interested in as you wander around. So the things that are, it's both direct and indirect interaction, and it's the frequency and reoccurrence of how often you've interacted with that thing that keeps it in the context. So the degree of interest model and the context is constantly being adjusted as you move around inside that particular task. So it keeps track of really, and it does really quite a good job of what you're currently interested in and working on. And I think,
does it measure the length of time you spend on that?
I actually don't believe it measures time, although they could, because they keep track of the timestamp. But the reason it doesn't measure time is because you might go away for a long period of time because you're uninterested, or you might go away for a long period of time because, in their case, their wife's having a baby, and it's unclear. You can't tell from just the IDE which one of those things is true, and so it doesn't use time; it just uses a clickstream instead, right? And so you use these thresholds to define level of interest. And you can actually, when you get good at this, you can tweak the various thresholds. If you find that too many things are showing up in your context or too few things are showing up in your context, you can sort of tweak these thresholds up and down. I've never had to do this. It's like one of these little great geek features that I know I can control the whole thing, but I don't have to.
Is it really 0 to infinity interesting, not 1 to infinity?
Well, it's a set that's above 0, and then up to 0 is not interesting.
I thought it was a curved thing. Okay.
Yeah, even with the pixels, it's curved. Okay. And I think I'm going to, and then I should have this one last slide here. Right, which is why this whole thing works. Besides the fact that it obviously works because I use it, so therefore you should use it. So that's clearly one of the reasons. But there's actually a theory behind this, which is that memory comes in 2 different forms. There's episodic memory and semantic memory. And the problem when we task switch and do too much context switching is that we're losing out on our episodic memory, and we're not keeping that around so that we then go on to the next task and we lose it. And so what Mylyn does is it makes those episodes first-class entities and keeps track of the context where we were at, and that it doesn't help you with the semantic memory of memorizing the multiplication tables which I had to do because I have gray hair, but maybe kids these days don't have to do that. But the point is that it doesn't help with that type of memory. It helps with the context switching, task switching memory of the short-term, episodes thing that you go to here, you go to there. You'll find that there are certain things in life that you remember over and over again. Like I have very vivid memories of what happened, of where I was and what I was doing when Challenger exploded on liftoff, right? That's the sort of memory that's not episodic memory, that's semantic memory, and I'm always going to remember exactly what I was doing when that happened. But, which set of files I was working on to work on bug number 60, you got me, right? But that's what Mylyn's for, is to remember that particular piece of just this particular episode. And so there's been a bunch of research on this, and the Mick, for his university research, went out and they did some user studies, and they verified that it actually statistically significantly increases productivity. I'm going to believe him. I'm not sure exactly how you do that, but then I'm not a PhD in user studies. So, and with that, I think I've used up all my time. I appreciate you're all asking questions so it didn't turn into a 5-minute talk, and I'd be happy to answer more later.